It was September 14th, 1996, MTV Studios, New York City. The annual Video Music Awards after-party was supposed to be a celebration, but backstage in a cramped dressing room, Eddie Van Halen sat alone, staring at his hands. Those hands had revolutionized rock guitar. Those hands had created sounds nobody thought possible. But tonight, those hands were shaking, and it wasn't from the adrenaline of performance. It was withdrawal. Eddie hadn't had a drink in 6 hours, the longest he'd gone in months, and his body was screaming for alcohol. What Eddie didn't know was that in another dressing room 2 floors below, his estranged brother, Alex Van Halen, was waiting. The two hadn't spoken in 8 months after a brutal argument that had torn the Van Halen family apart. Eddie assumed Alex hated him, blamed him for the band's implosion, for the chaos that had consumed their lives. When Alex walked into that room during what was supposed to be Eddie's lowest moment, what happened next wasn't just a reunion. It was the beginning of Eddie's fight for his life. This is the story of 2 brothers, a destroyed friendship, and a surprise that saved a legend. It was September 14th, 1996, and Eddie Van Halen was falling apart. From the outside, everything looked fine. Van Halen was still one of the biggest rock bands in the world. Their albums still went platinum. Their tours still sold out arenas. But inside the machine, everything was broken. Eddie was broken. The problems had started years earlier, but they'd reached a crisis point in early 1996. The band was trying to record a new album, their first with Gary Cherone as lead singer after Sammy Hagar's departure. Sessions were a disaster. Eddie would show up late, drunk, sometimes not at all. When he did show up, he couldn't focus. The brilliant, meticulous musician who had once spent days perfecting a single guitar tone now couldn't remember arrangements they'd worked on the day before. His brother Alex, the band's drummer and Eddie's partner since childhood, had tried everything. Patience, anger, intervention. Nothing worked. Eddie was drowning in alcohol and painkillers, self-medicating for chronic pain from decades of hip problems, for the pressure of being a guitar god, for childhood traumas he'd never addressed. The final explosion happened in January 1996. They were in the studio, trying to track a song for the new album. Eddie had been drinking since morning. He couldn't nail the solo, kept making mistakes he would never have made sober. After the 20th take, Alex had snapped. He'd come out from behind his drum kit, gotten in Eddie's face. "This is bullshit, Eddie. You're wasting everyone's time. You're drunk. You're destroying everything we built." Eddie's response was to throw his guitar, not at Alex but against the wall, where it shattered into pieces. Then he'd screamed back, "You don't know what it's like. You don't know the pressure. You just hit drums. I'm the one everyone expects magic from." Alex's face had gone white. That was the deepest cut Eddie could have made. Alex had been there since the beginning, had been Eddie's rhythm section, his foundation, his brother in every sense. To dismiss his contribution like that, to reduce decades of partnership to just hitting drums, it was unforgivable. Alex had walked out of the studio. He'd called their manager that night and said he was done. He couldn't watch his brother self-destruct anymore. He couldn't enable this. Until Eddie got serious about getting sober, Alex wouldn't work with him. The band went on hiatus. Eddie spiraled deeper. For 8 months, the Van Halen brothers didn't speak. Eddie was too proud and too ashamed to reach out. Alex was too hurt and too angry to make the first move. Their mother, Eugenia, called each of them weekly, begging them to reconcile. Neither would budge. Then came the MTV Video Music Awards. Van Halen wasn't performing. But MTV had invited Eddie to present an award. His manager convinced him to do it, thought maybe being around music and musicians might spark something positive. Eddie had agreed, but only because it got him out of Los Angeles for a few days, away from the studio where he'd failed, away from the house that felt empty without his brother's visits. What Eddie didn't know was that 3 weeks before the VMAs, Alex Van Halen had received a phone call from their childhood friend and band manager, Ray Daniels. "Alex, we need to talk about Eddie." Alex had been guarded. What about him? Ray had been direct. "He's getting worse. He showed up to a meeting last week so drunk he couldn't sign paperwork. He's going to die if something doesn't change." Alex's anger had wavered. He still loved his brother, despite everything. But what could he do that he hadn't already tried? Ray had an idea. The VMAs are in 3 weeks. Eddie's going to be there to present an award. What if you showed up? Surprised him? Alex had been skeptical. He'll just be embarrassed. Or angry. Or both. Maybe. But maybe seeing you, being confronted with what he's lost, maybe that breaks through. You're his brother, Alex. You're the one person who can reach him. They'd talked for 2 hours that night. Ray explained his thinking. Eddie was isolated, surrounded by enablers and hangers-on who benefited from his dysfunction. He needed to be shocked out of his routine, reminded of what mattered. A surprise appearance at the VMAs, a public moment, might be the catalyst. Alex had one condition. This isn't a publicity stunt. If we do this, it's real. It's about saving my brother, not selling records. Ray agreed completely. They'd planned carefully. Alex would fly to New York the day before the awards. He'd stay in a different hotel than Eddie. MTV was brought into the plan, their executives immediately agreeing to help. "This is bigger than an award show," one producer had said. "If we can help save Eddie Van Halen's life, we're in." The setup was simple. Eddie would present the Best Rock Video Award. During the commercial break immediately after, while Eddie was still on stage, Alex would walk out from backstage. It would be captured on the live broadcast's return. Millions would watch. The pressure of that public moment might force Eddie to confront what he'd been avoiding. September 14th, 1996, 9:47 p.m. Eddie Van Halen stood backstage at Radio City Music Hall, waiting for his cue. He'd had 3 drinks in the dressing room before coming down, just enough to stop the shaking, not enough to slur his words. He was a professional. He could hold it together for 5 minutes on stage. The floor manager gave him the signal. Eddie walked out to applause. He looked thin under the stage lights, his famous smile dimmer than usual. He read from the teleprompter, made a joke that got polite laughs, opened the envelope, announced the winner. The winner came up, gave their speech, and then the stage manager called for a commercial break. Eddie started to walk off stage. He'd done his job. He could go back to his dressing room, have another drink, maybe leave early. Then he heard the audience react, a weird collective gasp, confused murmuring. Eddie turned around, thinking maybe someone had tripped. Maybe there was a technical problem. Alex Van Halen was walking across the stage toward him. For a moment, Eddie's brain couldn't process what he was seeing. Alex couldn't be here. Alex wasn't speaking to him. This had to be the alcohol, had to be a hallucination brought on by withdrawal and stress. But the figure kept walking, and it was definitely Alex. Same walk, same solid build, same serious expression Eddie had known his entire life. Eddie just stood there, frozen. His mind was racing through possibilities. Was this planned? Was this an ambush? Was this real? Alex stopped about 10 feet away. The MTV cameras, which were supposed to be off during commercial, were still rolling. The producers had decided this moment was too important to miss. "Hey, Eddie," Alex said. His voice was quiet, but it carried in the sudden silence of the enormous venue. Eddie's hands started shaking worse than before. This wasn't withdrawal. This was emotion, crashing through the walls he'd built over 8 months of not dealing with what he'd lost. "What are you doing here?" Eddie managed to say. Alex took a step closer. "I'm here because you're my brother, and I miss you." Eddie felt something crack inside his chest. All the pride, all the defensiveness, all the armor he'd wrapped himself in to justify his behavior, it started crumbling. "I screwed up," Eddie said. His voice was raw. "I said terrible things. I know." Alex took another step. "I said some terrible things too. I walked away when maybe I should have stayed." Eddie shook his head. "No. You were right to leave. Look at me. I'm a mess, Alex. I can't stop drinking. I can't focus. I'm destroying everything we built." The audience, which had been whisper quiet, was now completely silent. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was two brothers having the most honest conversation of their lives in front of thousands of people and TV cameras. "You're not destroying anything," Alex said. "You're sick. You're an alcoholic. But that doesn't mean you're destroyed. It means you need help. And I should have helped you instead of judging you." Eddie's eyes were wet. "I don't know if I can get better. I've tried before. I always go back." Alex closed the distance between them. "Then we try again. Together, like we've always done. Since we were kids in Pasadena practicing in that garage, it's been us. I'm not giving up on you." Eddie lost it. The tears came and he didn't try to hide them. Alex grabbed him and pulled him into a hug. It wasn't a quick brotherly pat. It was desperate and tight. 8 months of anger and hurt and love all compressed into one moment. The MTV audience started applauding, but it was subdued, respectful. Even teenage music fans could recognize they were witnessing something sacred. When they pulled apart, Eddie kept his hand on Alex's shoulder. "I need help, real help, not another half-measure attempt." Alex nodded. "I know a place. In Minnesota, Hazelden. It's where real recovery happens. We'll go there together. I'll check you in." Eddie looked at his brother. "What about the band? What about the album?" Alex's answer was firm. "Forget the band. Forget the album. I don't care if we never record another note. I care that my brother lives. I care that you're around to see your son grow up. That you're around to argue with me about drums and guitar parts when we're old. That matters more than Van Halen." The commercial break ended. MTV came back live, and the cameras were still on Eddie and Alex standing on stage together. The VJ Kennedy improvised brilliantly. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're witnessing something special here. That's Eddie Van Halen and his brother Alex, and this is what love looks like." The show continued, but backstage afterward, the real work began. Eddie and Alex sat in a dressing room for 3 hours, talking through everything. The hurt, the anger, the addiction, the fear. Ray Daniels had arranged for a counselor from Hazelden to fly to New York, just in case. The counselor arrived at midnight. Her name was Dr. Sarah Feldman, and she'd worked with musicians and celebrities for 20 years. She didn't treat Eddie like a star. She treated him like an addict who needed immediate intervention. "Eddie, how much have you had to drink today?" Dr. Feldman asked. Eddie, still raw from the reunion with Alex, was honest. 6 drinks, maybe 7. I lost count." When was the last time you went a full day without alcohol? Eddie thought. Months. Maybe a year. I don't remember. Dr. Feldman nodded. You're physically dependent. Stopping suddenly could be dangerous. We need to do this right, with medical supervision. Can you commit to that? Eddie looked at Alex, who nodded encouragingly. Then Eddie looked back at Dr. Feldman. Yes, I can commit. What do I need to do? 2 days later, Eddie Van Halen checked into Hazelden Treatment Center in Minnesota. Alex drove him there personally. The press found out within hours. Van Halen guitarist Eddie Van Halen enters rehab facility. Speculation about band's future. Inside Hazelden, Eddie started the hardest work of his life. Detox was brutal. His body had been dependent on alcohol for so long that withdrawal caused seizures, hallucinations, and pain worse than anything his damaged hip had ever produced. But he stayed. Alex visited every weekend, driving or flying in from wherever he was. Those visits became Eddie's anchor. In group therapy, Eddie talked about things he'd never addressed. The trauma of immigrating to America as a child, not speaking English, being bullied relentlessly in school. The pressure of being called a guitar god when he still felt like that scared kid eating lunch alone. The way alcohol had been his friend when human relationships felt too complicated. One story Eddie shared broke Alex's heart. Eddie talked about the day they'd fought in the studio, about how he'd said Alex just hit drums. I said that because I knew it would hurt you, Eddie told the therapy group. Alex was always so steady, so reliable. I was jealous of that. I wanted him to feel as broken as I felt. So I attacked the thing that meant the most to him, our partnership. When Alex heard about this from Eddie later, during a private conversation, he understood for the first time that Eddie's addiction wasn't about weakness. It was about pain, deep childhood pain that had never healed. Eddie spent 90 days at Hazelden. When he emerged in December 1996, he wasn't cured. Addiction doesn't work that way. But he had tools. He had awareness. He had a commitment to recovery. And he had his brother back. The MTV moment became legendary for different reasons than most VMA moments. It wasn't about spectacle or performance. It was about vulnerability. About a public figure admitting he was broken and needed help. MTV aired the footage once during the original broadcast, then made a decision not to replay it in highlight reels or retrospectives. This wasn't content to be exploited. This was a moment of human crisis and resolution that deserved respect. But people who saw it live never forgot it. Online forums in the late 90s were filled with discussions about what they'd witnessed. I was there in the audience, one fan wrote on an early internet message board. When Alex hugged Eddie, I've never seen something so raw on live TV. You could feel Eddie breaking down, but in a good way, like he was finally letting himself feel everything he'd been avoiding. Van Halen didn't release an album in 1997. They didn't tour. Eddie focused on recovery, on rebuilding his relationship with Alex, on being a father to Wolfgang, who was just 6 years old. Alex supported him every step. The brothers started meeting weekly, not to work on music, but just to talk. Sometimes they'd go to recovery meetings together. Sometimes they'd just sit and play music quietly in Eddie's home studio. No pressure, no expectations. By 1998, Eddie had been sober for over a year. He and Alex cautiously started writing new material. The resulting album, Van Halen III with Gary Cherone, released in 1998, wasn't their most successful commercially. But Eddie was present for every session. He was focused. He was healthy. The creative partnership between the brothers, damaged so badly in 1996, was healing. Eddie would relapse later. Addiction isn't a straight line, but the foundation Alex helped rebuild that night at the VMAs held. Every time Eddie struggled, Alex was there, not enabling but supporting, setting boundaries but never abandoning. In interviews years later, Eddie credited that MTV moment with saving his life. "I was going to die," Eddie said in a 2004 interview. "Not eventually, soon. My body was giving out. My liver was failing." If Alex hadn't shown up that night, if he hadn't been willing to put himself out there publicly to reach me, I wouldn't have made it to 2000. Alex rarely talked about it publicly, but in one interview he admitted his own regret. "I should have acted sooner. I let my pride and anger keep me away for 8 months. That's 8 months Eddie was in crisis alone. If I could go back, I'd have shown up at his house the day after our fight. But I was hurt and stubborn. The MTV thing worked out, but it was also a gamble. I got lucky." The surprise appearance also became a touchstone for other families dealing with addiction. Treatment centers started referencing it in family therapy. "Sometimes the addict needs to be confronted, but with love," one counselor explained. What Alex did, that was confrontation with love, not judgment, not abandonment. Love. The footage from that night was eventually archived by MTV with a note: "Sensitive content, handled with care in all retrospectives." When documentaries about Van Halen were produced, that moment was included, but always with context about addiction and recovery resources. Eddie and Alex's relationship after that night became the bedrock of Van Halen's later years. When they reunited with David Lee Roth for a massive 2007 tour, it was possible only because the brothers had rebuilt their trust and partnership. Wolfgang Van Halen, who joined the band as bassist in 2006, later said that watching his father and uncle work together taught him what real commitment looked like. "They fought sometimes," Wolfgang said. "They disagreed about musical choices and business decisions. But after 1996, they never questioned their commitment to each other. That was settled. Uncle Alex saved my dad's life, and my dad never forgot it." When Eddie Van Halen died on October 6, 2020, from complications of throat cancer, Alex was with him. So was Wolfgang. Eddie's last conversation was with his brother, reminiscing about their childhood in Pasadena, about that garage where they'd started a band that changed rock music forever. Alex held Eddie's hand as his brother took his final breath. Later, Alex would say that moment, as heartbreaking as it was also a gift. "Because of that night in 1996 at the VMAs, I got 24 more years with my brother. 24 years of making music together, of being family, of watching him be a father, of having the partnership we'd built our whole lives. That MTV moment gave us that time." The surprise at the VMAs wasn't just about two brothers reconciling. It was about the power of showing up for someone when they're at their lowest. It was about loving someone enough to risk public vulnerability to reach them. It was about recognizing that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply be present. Alex Van Halen never regretted that decision to walk onto that stage in September 1996. In fact, years later, when asked about the proudest moment of his career, he didn't mention platinum albums or sold-out stadiums. "The proudest moment was walking across that MTV stage to get my brother back," Alex said. "Everything else, all the music, all the success, none of it would have mattered if I'd lost Eddie. That night reminded me what was really important, and it gave Eddie a chance to fight for his life. For fans who witnessed it, for families dealing with addiction, for anyone who's ever had to make the choice between pride and love, that moment remains powerful. It showed that even in the midst of chaos and pain and broken relationships, reconciliation is possible. Healing is possible. It just requires someone to make the first move, to be brave enough to show up, to say the words that matter most. I miss you. I love you. I'm not giving up on you. Those were the words that saved Eddie Van Halen's life, and they were delivered by the one person who'd known him longest, loved him most completely, and refused to let him disappear into his addiction. His brother, his partner, his rhythm section, Alex.